Yeah, I mean, you start off the question of like, do you even want kids? And for me, I was always so adamant throughout my life, like I really wanted a family. In fact, like over the years, throughout various relationships that I had, I was like, yeah, this is happening, like this is in my future. And obviously I was also pursuing the goal of competing at the Olympic Games. And I always thought winning an Olympic gold medal is gonna be way harder than like having a family. Turns out that's not the case.
I'm Amy Van Buskirk, the game plan advisor at the Canadian Sport Institute, Alberta, and I'm really excited to be joined today by one of our top fertility doctors in Calgary, Dr. Foong, who will be talking to us about our reproductive autonomy in athletes and coaches, and walk us through the process of freezing your eggs. And we also have two-time Olympian and 2016 Olympic champion, Erica Wiebe, who recently went through the process of freezing her eggs, and she's gonna walk us through her personal journey on what that looked like. And so the Game Plan program is a program that gives tools and resources to athletes to help them perform better, to stay in sport longer, and retire healthier. And so we've been doing a really great job of helping athletes continue into their sport longer, which is providing an opportunity for us to talk a little bit more about family planning, about freezing your eggs, about fertility options for athletes and coaches. And so really excited to have you both here to talk about that. And so first of all, one of the main questions that lots of people, as you get into your late 20s, 30s is, do you even want to have children? And I guess we'll start there with you, Dr. Foong, is what advice maybe do you have to a younger person who is maybe not quite sure if or when they would want to have children or the opportunity to have children?
Well, thank you, Amy and Erica, for having me today. I'm very honored to be here today and to help shed some light in this very important topic. Fertility is certainly something that many people think about, and I think we've reached a day in time where it is very important to have that ability to explore your options in a safe and respectful environment. But also it's very important for us to understand the concept of reproductive autonomy. That's the ability for you to make your choices about your reproductive plans, but still being able to balance all the competing factors, your career, your sport, your personal beliefs, your ethics, your values, and your own individual social situation. And so even if somebody is not sure as to whether they know what they want in the future, or if they even want children at all, it is very important to take that first step to be able to explore, to be able to have that discussion with a professional. So I would highly recommend and encourage anybody interested in having these discussions to seek a consultation with your family physician, who might then refer them to a fertility expert to further that conversation.
And so that first step, like you mentioned, would be, seeking out your family doctor or referral to a fertility clinic. And at what point, I know lots of people, maybe they don't 100% know for sure, but at what point would you recommend someone start this process? Is it 50% on the fence? When would you recommend they start that process?
I think it's a very individualized decision. Ultimately, everybody is welcome to explore this. I don't think that we should in any way pose any criteria that you have to 100% know what you want before you come forward. It is a safe environment to have these discussions. It is also important just to know what the options are. And often if people are grappling with the decision, I say that, you want to think about some big picture questions. You might want to have some clarity how important it is to have your own biological child. For some, it is very important. For others, they might be okay with third-party options, with egg donation, with adoption, with fostering. So it's that discussion to first explore how you feel about these important themes. It is also important, especially among athletes or who people have career plans, to think about what that career plan is going to look like. What is that timeline that you foresee? Do you see this as something that you would immediately want to do, or is this something that you want to save for later? And thirdly, the other big picture I often ask patients, if they're not certain, is, are you interested in having a baby right now? Has that crossed your mind? Or do you feel more comfortable just talking about preserving that option for the future? And often by just coming about these simple questions and thinking about these simple approaches can help bring more clarity.
Awesome. I love that answer. And Erica, so let's rewind a little bit. Before you met Dr. Foong, how did you come to the decision to want to freeze your eggs, or what were the questions that you asked yourself before you did this process?
Yeah, I mean, you start off the question of like, do you even want kids? And for me, I was always so adamant throughout my life. Like I really wanted a family. That was something that was really important to me. And in fact, like over the years, throughout various relationships that I had, like heterosexual relationships that I had, I was like, yeah, this is happening. Like this is in my future. And obviously I was also pursuing the goal of competing at the Olympic Games. And I always thought winning an Olympic gold medal is going to be way harder than like having a family. Turns out that's not the case. Here we are now. But I guess I had so much clarity on like what I wanted, or, you know, the pathway that I wanted for myself. And so I actually like remember vividly, I guess I was like thinking about, I had kind of heard this notion of like in vitro fertilization. I had this notion of egg freezing. And I basically like woke up on my 34th birthday and was like, I need to do this right now, like right freaking now. And I basically like that, because I think I had heard like that kind of at this age 35, like is a change, there's some changes biologically. It's like better, it's obviously better, everything's better younger. And I was like, okay, I need to do this. And I think every single athlete like really understands like when they have a goal in mind, they can achieve it. And I think also like there's a clarity of like what needs to be done. And so I reached out to my family doctor and I got got a referral. I was very clear on like, this is what I wanted to do. And within a week, basically, I sat down in Dr. Foong's office and we had our first conversation about it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And so did you have any assumptions before you met with Dr. Foong, or have you done any research to say this is like, how did you know this is exactly what I wanted to do? And maybe what was assumption that you thought before you even went there that maybe wasn't true?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I was obviously uncertain about like my future. Like I wanted like, you know, if there would be a pathway for me to have a biological child with a partner or alone on my own. And I didn't know what the future had in store. Like I had kind of just retired too. So there was like so many unknowns. I was actually moving as well, moving like across Canada. I was starting a new job and it's like, there's a lot of daunting pieces that actually like, you know, plug for game plan like that had really gotten so much help in navigating that space, but it's still really hard. And so I knew that I wanted to give myself the options, and I wanted to like, you know, regardless of what was going to happen, I wanted to, again, like it was almost like I was thinking of it almost like of having an insurance policy around like my reproductive pathways. Right. And so I was kind of like, this is what I want to do. And honestly, I'm kind of bad because like when I have something in mind, like I'm doing it. And like, I knew that there was, I guess, the one kind of myth that I had heard about that was really expensive. I thought that I knew kind of that it was going to be really, really hard. I found out that it was way harder and basically way more expensive than I could have ever imagined. But I also thought it would be lots of like hurdles to jump through. I thought it was going to be really big, really challenging. And it was pretty cool actually, because I had basically got the job done in about 2 months wow. From the time I like had this like thought on my birthday to having, I think, 17 eggs frozen at the end of August.
Cool. And so actually, let's start here too. Dr. Foong, like what does it mean when someone says like, I'm going to freeze my eggs? Like, can you walk us through a bit of that process and sort of after you met with Erica, what does that process look like, the consultation and then into the retrieval?
So when we start talking about fertility preservation options in general, I usually like to explore with the individual whether we're looking at freezing eggs or whether we're looking at freezing eggs that will be fertilized, and we call those embryos. And a lot of that depends on how confident a person is about their sperm selection, whether they have a committed relationship, they're in a committed relationship with a male partner with sperm, whether they are certain they want to use donor sperm, or perhaps they might still be keeping that option open because they haven't quite made a decision yet. And so as far as the concept of reproductive autonomy goes, we want to make sure that we're making decisions that allow us that ability to pivot, to change, and to have it reflect our personal beliefs and values at the right time. So often when an individual comes to me, they might be interested in freezing eggs if they don't have that person in their lives who will be able to provide sperm. In a situation where a couple comes and say they're in a heterosexual relationship, then we do talk about the option of both freezing eggs and freezing embryos. Because here in Canada, if you have genetic skin in the game, as we would say, then both of you have the right to decide whether that embryo is going to be used at a later date. So when we commit to fertilizing eggs with sperm, and if you're not that committed in that decision, you may be making a decision that may be very difficult to undo later on. And you wouldn't really truly be preserving your fertility. So if somebody was to proceed either with eggs or embryo freezing, on average, it takes only 2 weeks. And most patients are extremely shocked to find out that it could actually happen that quickly. And I often would recommend for them to actually take a minute or two or a few days or a week to think about things to make sure that this is indeed the path that they want to go ahead with. It starts, of course, with just testing, because we want to be able to give you your own individual numbers. You need to understand your ovarian reserve status, and the testing can be just completed within a matter of days. And the treatment is going to be about 2 weeks. Now, the important thing is for individuals to know that it is possible these days to complete these treatments at any time in your cycle. So if somebody is having regular menstrual cycles, they don't have to time it to when that cycle starts. If you had a competition coming up, or if you had a training session that you could not miss, it is possible to work around that. And of course, many young people may be using contraceptive devices. It is actually possible to go ahead with a treatment without interruption or removal of these contraceptive devices, such as an IUD. So our techniques and our protocols have advanced to the point these days where you basically say when you're going to start. We go ahead with injections that are self-administered, and that will usually take somewhere between 10 to 12 days. And then 2 days after your last injection, you will come in for a procedure that probably takes on average about 15 minutes, 20 minutes for the eggs to be harvested. And then they're frozen, and that's the end of that journey.
There you go. And so, okay, this is super fascinating. And so what age would you recommend someone start thinking about this, or what is maybe the bandwidth of the most like fertile eggs? Like when is the best time to retrieve eggs?
So biologically speaking, all of us are supposed to have our babies in our late teens and 20s, which of course doesn't happen anymore in our day and age today. So what we're trying to do is understand that concept of ovarian reserve, that concept that a person with ovaries is born with all their eggs from the beginning, and those eggs are all they're going to have for their reproductive lifespan. So in the general population, age 35 years is approximately when we start to see a decline. So in the best case, we would usually say that if you're hoping to freeze eggs, it is best to get informed and to make a decision about this prior to being 35 years old. However, the honest truth is, even if you were over 35 years, many people could still have good ovarian reserve to make this a possibility. And I always say, you're going to be just as young as you're ever going to be at that time. So if, you are over 35, if the reserve testing still comes out okay, individuals can definitely make an informed choice to still proceed with freezing.
And so what do you mean by when you say ovarian reserve? Is that how many eggs you are able to retrieve?
So ovarian reserve is just the number of eggs that you've been born with. That's going to last you a whole reproductive span. Interestingly, every month, a small subset of these eggs grow, and only one egg grows all the way to full maturity. That's released. So that's what we learn in school as ovulation. Mm-hmm. And at the completion of that cycle, at the end of that month, all those eggs actually, in a way, die off. Okay? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to harvest off a batch of eggs, something in the teens to 20s, from that batch before it is destroyed by the body at the end of the month. So you're not stealing from your reserve. You are not losing more eggs than you would normally lose, but you're keeping away a batch of eggs at that age. And of course, the most fascinating thing is that your chance for pregnancy, the risk of chromosomal abnormalities, all these concerns are determined at the age these eggs are removed from your body, not the age at which you come back to use them. So that's how that is the gift, the value of fertility preservation.
For me, when we had our meeting, and it was really cool because I think as athletes, we're really used to being told like what to do. Like, this is what you need to do. This is your training program. And it was really cool for me because you brought like such a open presence, and you asked like really just open-ended question. And I was like, well, just tell me what's the best process. Tell me what I need to do. And I remember like thinking this, obviously I didn't tell you that, but I really think you just brought such like an openness, and like the way in which you like explain the options, explain like the benefits, and like just the clarity around these are the options, these are the choices that you have, and like it's really for you to have like full autonomy over your decisions. And it was so cool to me. And then you were like, okay, you need to go and home and think about it, understand what your options are. And I was like, nope, I'm ready. Like, I don't really care about the good, the bad, ugly, like, let's go kind of thing. But you're like, okay, well, call the clinic like tomorrow. And then it was like such an emotional time for me because like it's really like, I think there's not a lot of information about it. It's this really important thing, I think, in many people's lives, like this idea. It's just, it was very physically demanding, emotionally demanding. And so I guess, but like the steps, because it was like, I had to go get blood work. And then the first kind of after the consultation, there was the egg reserve, this assessment appointment basically. And then what were the steps after that? Like, remind me, because it was a lot.
So the first step is usually an assessment of your individual numbers. So we call that an ovarian reserve test. So to do that, we usually do a combination of one or two tests. The first test is just a blood test. It's called AMH, or anti-Mullerian hormone. You won't remember that, but AMH. And that is probably, at this point, the most accurate assessment of what your ovarian reserve is, meaning the potential, the quantity of eggs we're likely going to be able to harvest from you. The other method of determining your ovarian reserve is by an internal ultrasound. These days, with the advancements of ultrasound, we can actually get up close to the ovary, we can peer in, and we can actually count the number of follicles that are growing in that batch, in that month. And it gives us an idea, an estimate as to how many eggs we would likely be able to grow to maturity, to retrieve, collect, and freeze for later.
And so when you say freeze for later, so ideally we want, or you would love for folks to come sooner than later, because those eggs are just a little bit younger. And so how long can you freeze the eggs? Like, how long are they viable? Is it 10, 20? Is it kind of forever? What does that look like?
So interestingly, egg freezing has only been considered non-investigative for a little over a dozen years. So this is how fast this technology is evolving. However, at this point, the method that we use to freeze eggs, and to be completely correct, we no longer freeze. The reason, so we talk about egg freezing, even medically we use the term egg freezing. But as we all know, freezing creates ice, and ice crystals are damaging to the internal structure of that egg. So if you think of the egg, it's actually the largest cell in the body. It is comprised mainly of water. So if you think of it like a grape, none of us can freeze grapes very well. They don't come out the same way. And so these days, we actually use a method called vitrification. Vitrification is actually the transformation of a substance from a fresh state to a glass-like state. And this preserves the internal structures, and it makes the eggs more successful in thawing. So with the current advancements, frozen or vitrified eggs are actually thought to behave very similarly as fresh eggs, both in terms of fertilization rates and, of course, ultimately the potential to make a baby. Wow. So we don't have a best before. We think that these eggs can be frozen for a long time, and certainly at this point, at least a dozen or more years. But we do encourage, of course, for individuals to come back to make decisions about their eggs and their family a bit sooner, because the other part is you don't want to carry a pregnancy when you're much more advanced in age.
Okay, Erica. So now you've been through your assessment, you've got the numbers, you have the medication. And so what was it like emotionally and physically to go through that? I know you mentioned earlier it was tough. Like, what was it like? Like, what can somebody else expect, through your own journey?
Yeah. And again, like maybe my journey is like definitely like my own personal journey. And I think like everybody has obviously different egg reserves, different protocols. And so I guess even like taking a step back, this is being really, you asked me like what's off the table, and I was like nothing. And so I had a low egg reserve, and even like that I think was emotional for me, because it's like, I think as an athlete, especially in the sport of wrestling, like I literally put my hands on someone else's body, and like I have full control over myself and oftentimes other people. And so I really like felt like I didn't have control over the situation. And even like that initial consult was like, hey, you have like a lower egg reserve than what's normal. And I was like, oh, and it's like, I can't control that, you know? And it felt, that was like even like the first step that was like, I was like, man, like my body is for the first time in my life, like it's like letting me down, you know? And I think that was like a theme for me emotionally, like throughout the process, where I was like, okay, body, like don't let me down, you know? And so I had my like egg reserve assessment, and then I basically like made the call, and we started talking about like booking the timelines. And it's basically like a 10-day to 14-day like process from start to finish. And I had a lot of travel coming up when I got that call, and I was like, well, like, you know, we were talking about some time periods to start it. And basically I was like, well, and basically she's like, well, can you come to the clinic in the next 20 minutes? And I was like, yeah. And then so I drove to the clinic, picked up like this package of like medications, and they're like, hey, we'll see you at 8 a.m. for your first ultrasound. And so, you know, and there's a kind of like, again, it's individualized, my experience, but it's like there was like a first ultrasound, like once you start injecting the medication. And then there's a couple check-ins. And then as you get closer to the retrieval date, it gets like on a daily basis, there's that monitoring. And so, yeah, you're like doing these injections on like a kind of on a daily basis at kind of in a specific time range. And so like, and I love needles. Like I always am that person, like we take blood, we're in the lab. Yeah. We're in the lab right now. Like I would get my blood done like here, like, you know, on a quarterly basis, and I would always like watch it. And like, I was very fascinated, but that like, you know, I was like, I remember like 2 or 3 days in, and I'm like, man, like even just like going through the process of like injecting yourself and like administering the dosage, like it kind of weighs on you emotionally. I think it's because that layering of like what it means, and you're kind of like aware of your body like going through these changes. And so it just became you know, really interesting as like an interesting experience, like physically, because I'm so self-aware of like how my body is feeling and like responding to different kind of variables, and then also like the emotionality of it too. Mm-hmm. And obviously you're injecting, and so again, I had a low egg reserve. So again, in a conversation, it was like, do you want to proceed with a normal dosage of hormones, or do you want to proceed with a super dose of hormones? And of course, I was like, I don't want to mess around here. Like, let's go super dose. Give it to me.
Plus, I'm asking an Olympic athlete, right? A gold medalist, if she wanted to go all the way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I was like, yes. And so again, so I factored into it, like, you know, you're injecting like these like high grade, like large quantities of hormones into your body. And so like that is a very interesting, like affecting like from an emotional perspective as well, like you can't even control. So yeah, it was hard. It was crazy.
And so we never really talked about this yet. So there was one day, this is about a year ago, I want to say, you were working here at the CSI Alberta, and you came into my office and you showed me a video of you, you know, injecting the needle, like going through those steps. And you were like, I'm not sure if I should share this. And I think what I said to you was, as someone who has shared almost every other journey in your life on social media and with the public, that I was kind of thrown off that you weren't like super keen, but I do get there is a bit of a stigma, and it is something that has been new to, I think even just the athlete space, but in general, the general public. And so what was that like going through that of like, you took those videos, and what was it like, you know, right before you shared it, and then after you shared it, what was some of the feedback like?
Yeah. And so I obviously like I had thought about it as I was going through the process, like, you know, I want to kind of capture this journey, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And that would have been like a day or two after the retrieval, because I had gone through the process. It had gone successfully, but there was like, even that was an interesting experience because yeah, we can, I don't know how to graphic now. We don't, it was like, it's a 10-15 minute retrieval, and it's a very painful retrieval. They do give you some great drugs, and I have a high pain tolerance. So it was like really interesting. Anyways.
Different type of pain than normal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They literally pierce a needle like through your uterus, right?
To the vagina wall.
Yeah. Yeah.
Different pain than wrestling.
Like,
yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But it's great. And then they suck up each one, right?
Correct. Yeah, correct. So it's we can't see the eggs. These eggs are microscopic, so you can't see them with the naked eye. So all you can actually see is the bags of liquid. We call them follicles, which is where the eggs grow. And so we can see on ultrasound, it's ultrasound guided, and we actually drain each follicle. But that fluid that's contained is immediately looked at under a microscope by the embryologist. So the really kind of all-inclusive sort of experience is also your ability to see your eggs as we retrieve them, as we identify them. So there's a TV screen that's hooked up to the embryologist microscope. And as those eggs are coming up, Erica had the opportunity to see her own eggs on the screen.
But even, and again, going back, even I'll get back to the social media piece, but even going back to like kind of normalizing these conversations, like, and again, like not feeling like trust almost in my body, and like fear throughout the process. Like I had a low egg reserve, and then once I had started taking the medications, and like the eggs were growing, and like the follicles were growing. I remember going in and getting the news that like, well, my left ovary had like a cyst on it, and there was not going to be a high chance of getting a lot of eggs from that. And again, it was like, you know, like this emotion of just like, okay, well, like, again, I can't control this. And I remember thinking also so vividly, like I wasn't actively trying to have a kid or a baby in that moment. And I hadn't dealt with like, you know, months or like years of infertility. And I cannot imagine like the hardship that like women and like people with ovaries who go through this experience and are actively like have had so much kind of hardship and challenge. And so I think, again, going back to this, like as I went through the process, I was like kind of capturing some of these moments. And afterwards, I put together like a little video. And it was like super personal, and because it was such a personal journey. And I was thinking about like, do I want to share this? Like, is this something that like, people want to see? Am I comfortable sharing this? Is this like important? Like it was something that was really important to me, but like nobody really talks about it. It's like, it's not something that you see every day. And also like, I was really scared too of like the backlash as well. Like, I think we live in a really interesting time with social media. Like it's really polarized. It's like these echo chambers. And I was also worried about like kind of how people would perceive me as well. But ultimately, honestly, like thanks to like your encouragement, I kind of had like prepared it, and I was like with this video, and I was like, what do I do? And you were just so supportive of it too. So like, thank you.
Well, I think, you know, as a game plan advisor, and some of my colleagues around the country, we had already seen this trend, and even just in kind of social circles as well, a trend of more people talking about it. And I think you are such a leader in the sport world, and you have such a strong voice that it was kind of, I would encourage you, because I had seen other people kind of struggling and they didn't maybe know what to do. So I think, I'm guessing your feedback from athletes or just people in general was quite positive, and the comments and your DMs after was pretty positive.
Yeah. So I made the choice to post it, and it was kind of just like, okay, like it's out there. And I think also because like, actually we had this great conversation where you're like, well, Erica, like, you know, your value has always been like transparency, authenticity. Like you've always like spoken like kind of truth to power, but also like been really honest about like things that you've been going through. And it's been so inspiring. And like one of my values is like impact, you know? And I was like, I have been like super honest, like of challenges that I've had in my career in sport. And so this is like that next step towards something that I do feel really passionately about. And I do feel like is something that doesn't get enough it doesn't get enough visibility, and something that like, it's just so incredibly important. So it was really, really amazing to hear and to receive so much positive feedback. even to the point where I guess like a couple weeks later, I was in Serbia at the Senior World Championships, and this random US wrestling coach who I'd never talked to before in my life stopped me and was like, "Hey, I saw your post on social media. Like, that is so amazing and powerful that you shared that. Like, thank you." And I was just like, whoa, like, and he like kind of turns away. It's like a hectic environment at those Senior Wrestling World Championships. And wrestling's not technically like a particularly safe environment for women to like at all anyways. Like, and so it's just so cool to see like the power of putting something like that out there. And kind of it's like why when you asked me to do this podcast, I was like, yeah, because like it's important to talk about the journey, but there's so many like mechanics and realities of the journey too that I think it's really important to share across like the spectrum of women's health and women's reproductive rights.
I think the normalization of your journey, that raw personal experience, is what is important. Often, we glamorize what we go through. It's just so simple, it's so easy. And we're not serving anybody any good by not sharing that raw emotion. But by normalizing it, by making it a true reflection of what you went through, allows people to be aware of what goes on, but also aware of the choices they're going to be making. And it allows them that openness to seek the options. I think when we are open about it, we educate people. We make it permissible to talk about it in a safe space. And I think that is so important. The fertility journey is very hard. And often there's stigma around it. People don't talk about it. They really don't share their true emotions. And to be able to normalize it and to actually give permission for you to say it's hard. We understand it. We've got you. We know this journey and we're here to help you. And that's the message that we're trying to accomplish with this, talking about it openly today.
And you're not alone.
And you're not alone.
Yeah. And that's also why I would encourage you to post that too, is because I think there were some other people that maybe felt alone, and you opening up that conversation like has led to this, a year later. So I'm going to get into some audience questions, and this kind of builds on kind of Erica's journey. So you were retired when you started this process. And so this is for Dr. Foong. So what would be one key piece of advice you would give to a coach or an IST working with an athlete who's still actively competing?
I think a person's career and their sport should be something that can still be taken into account, even if you wanted to consider reproductive options. So we do not have to set one aside or prioritize one over the other. These days, with the protocols that are available, this can be accomplished with some planning. There are also drugs and medications that we use that are approved. And so I think the most important thing is to seek out expertise in the area, make sure that you see a reproductive specialist who's familiar with the process, who's familiar with the water regulations about what substances are permissible versus which ones are banned, to really clarify the best time to do this. As I said earlier, you could pick a time that works well for your training schedule, for your competition schedule, and for your own personal activities, that it can be accommodated. What we're trying here is to seek some balance, to be able to have it all, to have your sport, to stay in the sport longer, but to also still be true to yourself and to what your reproductive philosophies and values are.
And that's actually a great segue into another question is, how will the medications needed impact training and competition through the WADA? You did a little bit, I think, of research on this. And so is there some options that athletes could do, or would you write a sort of a special form that an athlete would be able to take that?
So there's certainly options and alternatives available. So if a person wants to have a baby, then medications that are commonly used, such as oral medications, and examples I can give you are letrozole, clomiphene. These are medications that are considered not permissible. So we would need to make sure that we fill out those the exemptions for use, and to make sure that that's all clear so that this does not impact an athlete's career. However, patients who are interested in freezing eggs or freezing embryos, then there are lots of medications that are actually permissible in an athlete with ovaries. We can use gonadotropins, we can use metformin, we can use inositol. These are medications that are certainly approved and can be done. The other piece that probably should come into the planning is also how you would actually feel as you're going through the process. As Erica described, you're injecting yourself with these hormones. It's a very emotional environment. It's a very emotional time. You're not feeling your best. You're feeling a little bloated. You're feeling, a little
bloated.
tender.
A lot bloated.
Yeah, a lot bloated. And so it's nice to be able to be in an environment that's supportive of your journey, to be able to carve out some space and time with your coach to say, when is the best time to do this? And from a safety and recovery standpoint, can we carve up in a week or two for recovery? Most of these medications are cleared from your body within about a week or so after, or two.
Yeah, and I will say I especially because there's like the trigger injection, and then it's like it really triggers like this. What does it trigger?
It triggers the final maturation of eggs and the release of these eggs.
And then you're like, whoa, what's going on? And you have to do it at a very specific time, which is like stressful too, because
That's right.
So like then and like it's like as it's getting closer and closer to the retrieval, you're feeling like the swelling of your ovaries, and it's like, whoa. And then like after the retrieval, like obviously it's like you're on some medications like during the retrieval to manage the pain. And then you're like recovering from this. But I actually did a 50-kilometer bike ride the day of my retrieval.
That you didn't tell me about.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I kind of was
Olympic
like
athlete for you.
Well, I was feeling really emotional too. And I was like, I think I need to move my body. And maybe I don't recommend that, but it was like, I was, I guess, able to, like, I still lifted throughout throughout the process, like the 10 days leading into it. And then, I felt like pretty much like, but I was tender for like a day or two afterwards. But I felt like pretty turning back to normal. And I think it is like the emotionality component of it that is like the most interesting, I think, for me. And so again, I really encourage like people who are thinking about this, like being proactive. Like obviously it's helpful to have like a partner that you're going through it with. Like I was very lucky to be supported by amazing friends. And like I had this crazy experience, actually. This is totally random, but after my retrieval, I like was super emotional, and I like went for this walk in Mission like afterwards, and I was like, I just need to go get like a coffee for myself or something to like make myself kind of like get out of my like head space and little physical space. And I'm like walking through this back alley, and there's like a man with this like little cute like poodle, and I just kind of am like, I'm like a waif, like just like walking through this space, and I'm like kind of like on the brink of tears, and he's like, hey, gorgeous. And I'm like, hi. And he's like, come here, you need a hug. And this stranger just like embraces me. And then he's like meeting like Johnny in the back alley, and he's like, Johnny, come over here. And then Johnny's like, oh dear. And then the next stranger like hugs me. And then these two guys are like, we're on our way to get a coffee. You coming? And then these two strangers like sit with me for an hour. We have a coffee, and like they were talking about life. They didn't ask me, like they were like, we're here for you. We support you. We have no idea what you're going through. Right. And so I think too, it's like I such am a believer like that the world like offers you what you need in each moment if you're open and willing to receive it. And so it was like a really cool experience for me. So I think like creating like the conditions for success, like both physically and emotionally, is super important, like in everything that you do in life. But I think in this journey too, it's like, how can you create like this network, this community to support you, like the conversations with your coach, with your IST, like have these open conversations, like understand what the implications are, understand what you want, what you want to have happen, and then having like the flexibility and adaptability in those moments to manage changes that might occur, and know that your emotions are going to be all over the place, and just giving yourself grace in those times is really important.
Yeah. Good. What a story. That's yeah. And do you still see them ever? Like, did
I ran into one of them like a couple of weeks later, which is super random again. And we went and got ice cream that time. And there you go. I haven't seen them since. They were like my guardian angels in that moment, though.
Seriously. What a cool story. We have another audience question here. So we talked about freezing your eggs and then freezing embryos. And so what is the success rate compared against each other?
So there used to be a perception that it was better to freeze embryos over eggs.
Yeah, I heard that, and I was super bad.
and that may be true in a setting, as I had explained earlier, where you're in a committed relationship, you are confident about your selection of sperm. So the reason behind that is because in nature, there is a normal survival of the fittest, so we call it attrition. So you might start off with, so many eggs, but only a smaller number will fertilize and only a smaller number will be able to grow and develop into an embryo. Human embryos can develop 5 days, 6 days in the lab, and then beyond that all the way to a baby. So there's going to be a natural drop in the numbers every step of the way. So for individuals who have a confident choice who are confident in the choice of sperm, can choose to go ahead and fertilize, because when they freeze embryos in this setting, they've just gone along in that journey path further, closer to a baby. However, ultimately these days, we do have very good data to show that fresh eggs and frozen eggs behave very similarly and have very similar success. So at the end of the day, a very simple concept is just to understand that if that egg was going to make it to fertilization and an embryo, it will anyway. And whether you chose to do it now or later, it is still more important to prioritize your personal beliefs and values. And that if you were not ready with a confident choice in sperm, then it's best to maintain your reproductive autonomy and freeze eggs alone. And that's what we recommend for single people. We recommend for people who are still not in a confident relationship. We recommend that for people freezing and preserving fertility before cancer treatments, for example. These are all to maintain that autonomy.
And so speaking of finding out things on TikTok or Instagram, what is maybe a common myth or misconception that you get from patients that you see of things maybe that's in social media that isn't true?
Probably the most common misconception is that although we do a lot, and especially as athletes, you're at the peak of your fitness, your health, you really, really prioritize your body and eating well and healthy habits and exercise. But at the end of the day, as Erica had alluded to earlier, our ovaries are a different thing altogether that's separate and is not always within your control. It is not always something that you could control that we're used to in every aspects of your life. And so a common misconception is people might think that if they were in perfect health, that they exercised and they ate well and they reduced their stress levels, that their ovaries will maintain that youthfulness for as long as they need to, as long as that they're healthy. And although some of these habits, such as smoking, could accelerate a person's aging, it is still important to be aware of the biology that is still ongoing. And therefore, it is very important to then assess your own ovarian reserve and to come to some decisions at the right time.
Right. Yeah, that's a good one. This is another question that we got online. And you kind of alluded to this earlier. So if you freeze your eggs at 25, and let's say now you're 35, and you get those eggs kind of put into you, is that then classified as a geriatric pregnancy? Or what does that,
Well, I hope the term geriatric pregnancy will be permanently banished to the archives.
Yeah, we hope so too.
We will not use those terms.
As 35-year-olds.
Socially, we're in a situation right now that all of us, most of us are able to have a baby at a time that is older than our biological age would ideally want us to have that baby. By freezing eggs or embryos at a younger age, you can, in a sense, freeze that chance of conception, the risk of conception, the risk of miscarriage at that age that those eggs are removed. So these days, assisted reproductive technologies, IVF, egg freezing, these technologies are so common that when our patients conceive, we often would ask, were these eggs at this age that you currently are at, or is this pregnancy created from eggs that are of a different age, and if so, what age? So this is a normalization. It is not making any assumptions, but certainly it is also a way to protect us against the ravage of aging.
Right, and then so before we kind of wrap up here, what would be your message to an athlete or coach that is looking to start this process? What would be sort of your one takeaway?
So I believe in reproductive autonomy. I believe that an individual should be able to make choices for themselves based on their personal values, their beliefs, their biology, their sport, their career, and to be able to bring all of that together. And I also believe that we need to be able to offer a safe space that is supportive for that individual to seek such options and to pursue it if they choose. And the most important thing at the end of the day is that you did it on your own autonomous decision. You did it because you made that choice to do so, and it was an empowerment to allow you to make that choice freely.
Love it. That's a great answer. Erica, what would be piece of advice you'd give an athlete or coach who maybe is starting this process or going through this process?
Yeah, I think maybe my piece of advice, like to the system, to the people, is like talk about it, keep talking about it, keep advocating for it. And like change does not come overnight. Sometimes it actually can, but there needs to be this like large swelling, in the best sense of the word, of support and of interest and awareness of this. And, you know, I look back to the advocacy efforts that went into like creating an increase to AAP support over the last year. And with that, they actually added the pregnancy card for women who don't have to take an injury card over during their pregnancy. If they're a carded athlete, they can actually get a different separate pregnancy card, which is a massive shift in the landscape of funding for Canadian athletes. And so I think with that though, there's still a massive gap around like the support for women who are looking to freeze their eggs and go through this process. It was really expensive for me. And so I was thankful that like my work covered the medications component of it, which was about like $4,000. And then out of pocket, I paid almost $10,000. It was a lot of money, but I looked at it as like an investment in myself and something that, you know, I thought a lot about. And in some ways, like sport has given me so much. And again, I wanted to set the table for myself to like get everything that I wanted in my life. And so I made that investment in myself, and it was a tough decision, but it was also in some ways like an insurance policy. Like I'm always going to bet on myself. And so, yeah, like that's what I did. And so I think specifically for people that are thinking about this process, are going through it, I think A, like you're not alone. B, there's such an amazing support out there if you ask for it, if you seek it out. And I think also have grace for yourself through the process, both across all stages, the decision making, the initial assessments, the 12-day intense process of injections and procedures and meetings, and also in the aftermath too. And I think there's no one better than athletes to be able to handle the total spectrum of emotions that go in this process. They're very well prepared for it, even though it's a completely different playing field than what they're used to.
And that's a shout out to the Momentums group that you're a part of, working for advocacy with Jill Moffitt and the crew through the Olympic Legacy Grant to help women's health and move it forward with the AAP funding and that, which is a big shout out to you and that crew for doing that, because it's huge and it's been a great momentum shift for female athletes and coaches in the sports system right now. Dr. Foong and I talk about this, if we were going to put the fee chart of what that looks like, but honestly at this point and where we're at, it's a little complicated in terms of what province you're from, your work, your insurance, tons of different things. So again, back to your point of it's individualized, meet with a doctor and get what that looks like. And then as well too, Erica, some of that mental health piece. Did you seek mental health support through this journey, through the game plan program and through a mental health network? Were you able to access that, and was that helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think I definitely have a lot of things to work on and work through, I guess. And so it was really helpful to talk to a professional through the process. And again, even I think like there's lots of positive and negative about social media, but it was really nice to share the journey and hear the impact that it had on other people. And again, I really attribute it as well to like my close friends to support me through this, was really instrumental.
Awesome. I just want to thank you both for joining us today. I think this is going to be a great conversation. Hopefully it keeps going on socials and maybe in the comment section of this session. And I'm really excited for everyone to see it. And this is coming out around International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day to everyone. See your doctor. Let's normalize a conversation around fertility, preservation, and autonomy. And yeah, I'm excited to see where this goes, and hopefully good luck for you in the future, Erica.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.